From palace envy to tiny sausage, Prince Harry has made it clear that he's had it tough. That's right, the prince has been hard done by. His discontent within the royal family surely in part comes from Harry's personality alone. He has been described throughout his life, since before all the major controversies he embroiled himself in, as being rather malcontent, combative, petulant, and entitled. And we've seen evidence of each of these behaviors throughout the years. You know, he had some tumultuous times as a teenager where he was difficult, he wasn't doing great in school, he was getting into fights with paparazzi, you know, those sorts of things. He had the whole Las Vegas incident, really proving his poor judgment, and then everything that's happened since he got with Meghan. But in addition to that, some believe a lot of these problems stem in part from Diana's desire to have the boys treated as equals, setting an expectation in Harry that can never truly be met. How much of the estrangement and Harry's vendetta against the royals stems from perhaps well-intentioned but misguided or short-sighted approach during his childhood versus genuine unbridled envy and jealousy? And how much is just Harry being a jerk? The smaller room in the castle, smaller sausage than William, hardly crimes against Harry, but he frames them as such. He takes such issue with these things. They are wounds. And so I feel it's important to preface this analysis with a disclaimer that the things Harry has complained of are almost all small problems. He's incredibly privileged and, unfortunately for him, incredibly out of touch and too far removed from the harsh realities that most people deal with. So his efforts to tell us that he's been hard done by largely only make him look like a whiny crybaby, because ultimately, compared to the good he's had in his life, the privilege that he's had in his life, most people would never complain about the things that Harry has complained about because they pale in comparison to the struggles that most people have had to endure with much less resources and privileges and support and help and all of these other things that Harry never had to worry about. Perhaps the most in-depth look we have at Harry's view of how he's been treated unfairly and whatnot come from his memoir, Spare, which, for anybody new here, that is where Harold comes from. When we call Prince Henry, Harold, we're referencing in Spare when he said that William used to call him Harold, and it made him irritated. So I thought, why not use Harold? Naturally, if it irritates Harry. But in Spare, Harry explicitly explores feelings of unhappiness and frustration being the spare to William's heir. Felt that he was living in William's shadow since childhood, and he felt that he was treated differently by the royal family than William was. Now, of course, some of this is just going to be normal childhood brother problems that everybody experiences if they've had a sibling. Some degree of the oldest looking like or feeling like they're getting more privileges or a greater share of things, which sometimes is sort of true, but sometimes it's not, and it's just the perception that you have as a child. And this is sort of an exaggerated version of that, given that Prince William is the heir and Prince Harry was the spare. He stopped being the spare when Prince William started having children. But regardless, some of that is a little bit understandable, that it was a little exaggerated, but that's where that dynamic that throughout childhood, Princess Diana really wanted them to be treated as equals, and because there was just two of them, unlike with, King Charles, he had multiple siblings who all kind of together had their own things and own paths they needed to figure out. When there's just two, I think that it could be more challenging because each one just has to be different in terms of their futures to some extent. But I think that it did set perhaps an unfair or unrealistic expectation in Harry that throughout childhood he was told that he should be treated equal, and he should have. Of course, everybody should be treated equally. But then as he gets older and sees, William is still supposed to walk first. William is still supposed to meet people first. There's these other things. William should have first pick of projects, stuff like that. Those types of things would feel more unfair to Harry after a childhood of feeling like and thinking that everything's going to be equal and fair, then when you get to adulthood and see, well, no, you can't be co-king, which is a ridiculous idea that apparently Meghan and Harry thought would happen, that they could either take the Prince and Princess of Wales title or be co-king and queen alongside William and Catherine, which just seems so juvenile. But it would perhaps explain why they thought that was a possibility, because for Harry, that shift towards, okay, throughout childhood you were treated nice and equally and fair. Now it's time for, Prince William to step into his role as the heir and you to step into a supportive role. That could be pretty challenging for somebody like Harry. Evidently, it was. But these admissions in spare led many readers and commentators to interpret deep-seated resentment or envy. Even if Harry never really uses the word jealousy directly, it was clear, it came through the pages, that he was jealous. Harry has tried to paint the picture that William received more attention and care from the institution, greater resources and responsibilities, and preferential media coverage. Because William was groomed to be king, many believed that Harry felt marginalized, which could naturally breed envy or frustration, even if rooted in structural hierarchy rather than favoritism. And that's what I'm trying to say, that throughout childhood, the intention of fairness and equality across the children was the right approach, but it did need to come with an understanding and expectation that as you reach adulthood, Prince William does have a priority in a lot of things, because that's just how it works, and that makes sense. But that doesn't need to be the detrimental, huge problem that Harry makes it out to be. As far as allegations of William receiving more attention and more care from the institution, a lot of that has been disputed because people who have worked in the palace or close to the family have said that's just simply not the case. Harry's opinion is that the press purposefully sort of skewed the media coverage and thus the public perception, portraying William as the dutiful future king and criticizing Harry as the rebellious spare, and also compared their wives more favorably to Catherine than Meghan. And this public contrast reinforced the idea that Harry may have felt less respected and less appreciated, but it's important to remember Harry did behave like a rebellious spare. Harry was getting into trouble and being rebellious. He even admits as much. So his argument that this was all the media's fault doesn't make sense and match reality, because William has always been a little bit more respectful of his role and seemed to have a lot more self-control than Harry. William has always come across that way. Even when they were children, William seemed more reserved than Harry. Different personalities. And it's important to remember also that all of this is through this very one-sided perspective, because Harry's the only one who has really come out and said anything or talked about these things, because it's just not the done thing and it's not a smart thing to do, and it wouldn't lend itself to respecting Prince William or the monarchy if he came out and started sharing his side of things. But I think it's important to think about and put yourself in William's shoes, that William did have more responsibility thrust upon him and greater expectations put on him than Harry did. And William also was the older of the two, so even just that dynamic, removing it from the royal sphere, the oldest does tend to have more responsibility put on them and is expected to sort of look after their sometimes frustrating and annoying younger siblings, or tolerate their younger siblings' foolish behavior sometimes. An older sibling is expected to do that. And William, perhaps there's a possibility that he maybe had some frustrations or felt that he had to have a more controlled experience, maybe had less opportunity to go be fun or do silly things or make mistakes or just go and do what he wanted the way Harry did. There's a possibility that William also felt that this isn't necessarily exactly what he would have picked for himself right now, in the 20s, in those younger years where you might want to just be able to go travel and have fun and have less cares and less worries, William didn't have as many opportunities for that as Harry did. And so there is a possibility that Harry is ignoring the fact that William also sometimes felt similar ways, which has always been one of my main complaints about the way Harry approaches these issues, is that he completely ignores William's feelings and side of things and potential thoughts and opinions on this stuff from his side. Perhaps William wished it had been different. Perhaps William, who also lost his mother, who also had expectations put on him by the monarchy and his family, wasn't always perfectly pleased with how it went down either. But Harry always ignores this and paints it as if William was in line with these decisions all the time, driving these decisions and choices forward, that William was just part of it all and not just complicit in it, but actively doing these things unfair towards Harry, which I've always thought was a huge mistake on Harry's part and hugely unfair for William. But there were also tensions over royal roles. Harry was frustrated by being sidelined in royal decision-making because he carried less weight in terms of deciding how things were going to go and what projects he was going to do. He had fewer duties and less say in public image control, which in part was because he shared staff with Prince William, and Prince William obviously was a little bit more senior in terms of his role, and Harry was in a supporting role. So of course he's going to have a little bit less say and a little bit less resources dedicated to him, but he had more freedom as an exchange for that. His ideas for modernization, especially once he was with Meghan, were not welcomed, naturally, because they had ridiculous ideas. They wanted to profit off of things like Trooping the Colour. They wanted to charge tickets. They wanted to be allowed to sign autographs, which is a security risk. They wanted to either have Prince and Princess of Wales or be co-king and queen. I mean, just, you can't make it up. It's insane. They also wanted to be able to dabble in commercial ventures and merchandise and stuff like that, which would just be tacky and is just, there's no place for that within a monarchy. And this created a narrative that Harry wanted more influence, which some interpreted as wanting a role more like William's, but being shut down. Now, I could understand Harry and Meghan being frustrated that their ideas weren't being listened to or really open to hearing Meghan and Harry's ideas objectively. But you have to remember the very, very brief time window in which these things happened. From the time that Meghan and Harry got married to the time that they left, Meghan had only gone on, I think it was like 72 engagements, meaning there was just 72 times that she went somewhere and did something on purpose. Some of those happened in the same day, like 2 in a day. So there's very little experience under Harry and Meghan's belt as a couple before they started trying to really push different ideas and modernizing this and that and trying to have their say on things and take more control of their roles. And as you have said, as I have said many times, the consensus, because it's common sense, is that if Harry and Meghan had given it more time, a few more years, they could have brought forth ideas and been more respected. The monarchy might have been more open to hearing them, and they would have had more pull. Because if they had been doing a good job for, say, 5 years, and then they're like, hey, we really think that this is something good and interesting, it would have been received better. But they didn't wait. They wasted no time. They came in there with ideas. Upon the wedding, Meghan was already ready to make huge changes, and it just wasn't received well because she didn't know the job. And she didn't know the country she was working for, really. So she needed to take more time, and she was unwilling to do that. Prince William and Prince Harry have always had a dynamic that seemed like supportive brothers. But when you look a little bit deeper, it seems there was always a little bit of them being on different pages or just maybe not getting along quite perfectly. Royal watchers often analyzed the interactions between the brothers, noting stiff body language, awkward moments during public events, especially when Harry was trying to joke around and William was taking a more serious approach, or sometimes William just was trying to rib Harry a little bit, some banter, and Harry got serious about it and really offended. And a visible cooling of their relationship was obvious to the press from the time he and Meghan got engaged. And part of that we now know is that William advised Harry to take things a little bit slower with Meghan, to not rush into a wedding, to not rush into living together. And Harry took offense to that. And seeing their dynamic in person, cool, but also looking back at older videos of the brothers together, it has only fueled speculation about competition and resentment between the brothers. Harry and Meghan's decision to step back in 2020 was seen by some as a rejection of playing second fiddle, a desire to escape William and Catherine's shadow, and a move toward building their own brand outside the monarchy, which we have seen not work out very well, but that was the intention. It was clear that a big motivation for Harry and Meghan's leaving had to do with and came down to the seniority issue within the job, that they were never going to be able to pick first or come first. They were never going to be the ones first and front and center. They were never going to be the ones to be able to decide the direction of things. Critics and commentators interpreted Megxit as driven partly by envy and rivalry. Although Harry has tried to frame it more as self-preservation, and Meghan as well, they acted like it was this big dramatic freedom flight. We had to leave. We had to escape all of this. But that's in contrast to other comments that they made about being frustrated of not being able to do things the way they wanted and not have the freedom to do things the way they thought they should be allowed to do them. And now most recently saying that they wanted to stay and they wanted to keep their roles, but that they weren't allowed to. Make up your mind. Some key turning points or really notable moments between the dynamic of the brothers include when in 2005 Harry wore a Nazi costume and it created a huge scandal, and he tried to push blame for it off on William and Catherine, said that they thought it was hilarious. Now, this is often reported so poorly. It was a costume party where it was supposed to be like villains and evil figures and people who were bad. And so the context was you were supposed to wear a costume of somebody controversial or despicable or terrible. Now, you can argue the taste of such a costume party all you want. They were young. It was a party, whatever. A costume party needs a theme. The fact that Harry tried, though, to say that it was William and Catherine's fault that he wore it is ridiculous. In 2016 and 2017, as Harry and Meghan's relationship bloomed, William's warning to Harry to slow down sparked major tensions. A lot of people thought that was kind of the initiating point of tension, the biggest problem. But since then, Harry has alluded to problems stemming from royal work even before then. Before Meghan came along, both Harry and William wanted to do work with conservation in Africa. And Harry felt like he should be the only one doing that type of work in Africa, and they disagreed on how to do it. Harry took the route of Africa Parks. We've seen how that worked out. And William took a different approach that was helping local people take control of conservation and protecting the animals from poachers themselves. And William's approach has been way more successful and less controversial, to say the least. A lot of people also speculate that Meghan had a very different idea of how being a working royal would be to what was actually happening, because she idolized Princess Diana, who was married to the future King of England. So Princess Diana's public roles and duties and the things that she was doing for her work were oriented in that way, similar to Catherine, Princess of Wales, that sort of track. Meanwhile, Meghan and Harry in reality were always going to be in a supportive role on the track of being a support, more like Princess Anne, but they lack the work ethic to do things that well. Maybe perhaps more like Prince Andrew before his scandals sort of took him out of public view, understandably, obviously. But I think Meghan envisioned doing things the way Princess Diana did. She envisioned giving speeches and doing tons of engagements and events independent, on her own, solo appearances. That's what Meghan was like, yes, this is what I'm going to be doing. But she completely missed the fact that she is not married to the future king. She was totally unable to reconcile her vision of being Princess Diana type of work and public appearances like that with the reality that she was in a supportive role that was going to be a lot more low key, just a lot more low key. But It's also important to remember that William and Catherine were totally on board with the whole Fab Four thing. They were happy to share the duties and responsibilities because Catherine and William like being home with their family. They prioritize that. So the thought of having a team of 4 of them to accomplish the work, and of course, each of them still having some of their own independent initiatives, but also sharing the workload of all those other types of appearances, was attractive to them. They wanted it to work out. They wanted that extra help during that time frame, and it was lining up perfectly to where while their children were still so young, they were going to have those extra helping hands for all of the responsibilities and appearances, and it was going to be a lot more of an even distribution of workload than it was for Prince Charles with his siblings. That was the original plan, but Harry and Meghan still, it didn't feel enough for them. They were expected to support the monarchy, not lead it, and they were going to have limited royal duties, often ceremonial or supportive, whereas Catherine and William were taking on formal duties, state events, and leadership roles. And that's the type of glitz, glam, and being in the spotlight that Meghan really was after and frustrated by. Another thing that Harry tries to blame his discontentment with the royal family and his experience with the monarchy on came to do with the press. He claimed that William was generally protected by palace press offices, with fewer personal scandals reported, while Harry felt that he was left exposed or blamed for negative headlines and was targeted by tabloids for drinking and partying. But he ignores the fact that he actually was doing those things. He was out there being rebellious, he was out there causing up trouble and complaining and things like that. And even to this day, he and Meghan actively criticize the press, complain about things all of the time, and expect and want only positive press coverage and fight to try to get it when that's just not the reality of how things work. Whereas William has rarely spoke publicly about the media, but also guards his and Catherine's privacy really carefully. They don't give personal interviews. They're not out there making themselves available for these sorts of things, and they're smarter, they're quieter in terms of public image, because that allows them to keep the interest a little bit more low, a little bit more low key at least, so that they can have their privacy easier. So Harry has taken just the completely illogical approach to this and then complains about it and isn't taking responsibility for the fact that he was a bit of a troublemaker and was kind of bringing on negative headlines for himself. So throughout childhood, they were beloved by the public, both Harry and William. And even into their young adulthood, people didn't know that there were these issues with Harry to the extent that he says that he has now. But as they grew, and as the, sympathy for them as children sort of transformed into the public viewing them as adults, and, both of them getting married and things like that, the reputation now is that William is seen as stable, responsible, a good role model, all of those good things, and a very suitable heir, that he is going to be a great king. And Harry is polarizing. He has been praised for his honesty and openness and seemingly sort of fun vibes before, that he can be kind of fun in person. But he's been criticized for his complaints, his hypocrisy, and his sort of two-faced nature, where he can be very, very mean behind the scenes and sort of flip a switch and be very, very mean about people, about the press, things like that, which we have seen in real time play out across his various projects. He's obviously a more emotional person and a more outspoken person, and seems to thrive on making sensational, sometimes hostile claims, while William has the image of a steady, calm, dutiful leader who's respectful and often protective. And so he's just more respected in the media because of the way he conducts himself. William's preference, privilege, and media protection stand in contrast to Harry's marginalization and public vulnerability, but Harry's criticisms and departure seem to demonstrate more envy and resentment of William's position and treatment, which, mind you, he didn't choose for himself, more than anything. Harry clearly doesn't envy the responsibility, but rather resents the double standards that he has dealt with. So as you can see, these are two very, very different people on two very, very different paths. But they, most importantly, have taken two very different approaches to their public image and the media. And Harry's complaining, his bad behaviors, his lack of self-control and discipline have resulted in the reputation he now marinates in, which is not a good one. And it's not William's fault. I think when you look at this story and this context of these two brothers from the time of their childhood until now, it's very clear that a lot of what has gone on with Harry and the mistakes that he's made and the attacks that he's lobbed over at the royal family, so much of that has to come from his personality, a large amount of it. And I still think a lot of it comes across as jealous and envious and just sort of this vindictiveness towards his brother that he can't seem to control. But how much do you think the way they were raised and the theory of, equality and whatnot that Princess Diana spoke about wanting her boys to have has influenced the way Harry has dealt with things as an adult? I'm really curious to hear your opinions on it and how much you think that has influenced all of this that we have seen, apart from the envy and the general sort of negative attributes to Harry's personality. Thank you for joining me for today's video. I hope you have a happy day ahead, and I'll see you next time. Bye!